So in this session, we are going to look at economic barriers in development communication. Let's get started. What are the crucial factors to consider when we talk about economic barriers in DevCom? Let's take things one by one. First one is poor infrastructure. So poor infrastructure of a particular country or a particular geography plays a very significant role in terms of looking at the economic aspect of the country, whether it is growth or sustainability of development. If a country has poor infrastructure or if the country lacks infrastructure in that sense, it is going to affect the economy of the country directly. Then human capital inadequacies. We are going to look at human capital inadequacies and primary product dependency, both in details terms. Um, the next part is declining terms of trade. So when you are, as a country or as an economy, you are doing business with other countries or other geographies, and there is a gradual decline in terms of the trade relationship or the business relationship that you have with other countries for whatever reason. I mean, there are several factors for which a particular country or the business company business partnership gets affected. It has a direct impact on the economy. So declining terms of trade plays a significant role or plays a very important role when we consider the factors depending on the economy. Then saving gap, inadequate capital accumulation. So saving gap is, in the most fundamental sense, try and understand it from a point of view of a family or an individual, that you are saving for a certain amount of time. You know that okay, this is a certain amount of money that you're going to save from the income that you are generating um, every month or every year, and then there is a certain gap in terms of that saving for whatever reason. There could be several explanations to why you could not save, or your savings got a hit, and it's something that is applicable to countries as well. Like for example, in our case, we have taken so much of loan from the World Bank and other economic um, places, and then we need to pay that amount back. So when there is a sizable amount of saving gap, um, it does affect the economy. Then inadequate capital accumulation. So if you are not doing enough business, you are going to go into recession, and there won't be enough profits, so to say. So capital accumulation can amount to the kind of profit that you make from the businesses that you do within the country as well as outside when you're doing export businesses. So when recession happens, when global recession happens, it has a collateral impact on all the countries who are part of different economic forum. So in such sort of a situation, what happens is the capital accumulation kind of gets a hit, and that in turn affects the economy and the income of the country. Then corruption, poor governance, impact of civil war. These are very straight on the face sort of explanations or the factors to consider when we talk about gradually declining economy, that how corruption kind of works almost like a cancer in the economic structure, in the economic body of a country or a particular geography. Then if the place is badly managed, it could be bad economic policies, or it could be poor governance structures, or there is a larger impact of civil wars on places. You see all the places which are affected by civil wars, how their economy kind of takes a hit because people don't want to do business there, they don't want to risk their lives, and so on and so forth. Then population issues, one factor which we have been discussing or debating since the beginning of the semester when we spoke about how DevCom plays a significant role in the overall development of country and how population has a larger role to play in that. So every issue related to population has to be factored in when we talk about economy. conditions or the situation of economic condition in the country. Then debt dependence. If you as a country or you as a community is always dependent on finance from some other place or some other country, then you would be forever in that loop of debt. You'll never be able to repay the debt or never be able to be economically free, so to say. So debt dependence on of a particular country is something that needs to be considered or factored in when we talk about the overall economic growth and sustenance of a country and what role communication can play in terms of taking this idea forward. Okay, what are the key issues when we talk about economic effects on DEFCON? Is rapid growth sustainable? So when we look at certain countries or certain communities or geographies, and we see them growing, and it can happen with individuals, it can happen with smaller communities, and it can happen with the country for that matter. What should we go for? Whether we should go for stable, steady, slow growth, or we should look at rapid growth, and how do we equate them when we talk about overall economic arch of a country or a particular community? So one question that always comes up is rapid growth sustainable? Can we sustain growth that is coming to us or that is happening with us? Because I mean, it's often noticed that those people or the communities grow extremely fast. There is also a slope. The curve also goes down. The rapid growth most of the times is not sustainable because we tend to lose sight of the kind of profits that we are making or the growth that we are making. That makes us in the process lackadaisical or careless, and we tend to introspect less as a community, and we ride, when the high tide is there, we tend to ride along with the tide and we think that we are going to reach the horizon. But sometimes the water needs to be stable in order to stay afloat, and the ship to continue sailing. So in that sort of situation, what you need to do is question that if the growth is happening at such rapid pace, is it going to be sustainable? Because the whole idea is to sustain. Whether you are an individual or whether you are a community or whether you are a country, the target should always be that whether our growth is sustainable or not. Whether it is fast or slow, that's something that you need to introspect second and see how to stably take that sort of a journey instead of rising too fast. So there is a risk of falling as well. The next point is one of the key issues is, does it feed through the significant improvements in human development? Because when we talk about development communication, when we talk about development in general, what we need to see is, are people growing? We can always look at it from a point of view of critiquing the the state or critiquing the country and say that, okay, everybody is talking about economic development, and let's say, for example, in our case, India is becoming a superpower. India is becoming economic superpower. Then why a sizable amount of the population, the entire population, is still staying hungry every day? So is there any significant improvement that has happened in terms of human development and life? We can't just consider the upper class people or those people who have access to things, or the middle class for that matter, who had the privilege to educate themselves and be employable for that matter in better sectors, trying to survive and sustain through. Then if they are improving, we can't look at that matrix of development as something that can equate for the entire country's growth. It doesn't work that way. Then in that case, we have several billionaires in our country. Then we can just declare India to be economically developed already. Why are we being in a state of progress still? Why are we being called as uh, developing nation instead of a developed nation? Because still sizable amount of population is below poverty. So unless their uh, conditions improve, unless we see or witness significant improvements in the overall human development of a particular country or developing economy or underdeveloped economy, we can't say that, okay, economically we are getting placed in a better place. Then resource intensive countries are more likely to respond effectively to economic barriers than non-resource intensive countries. Those people who have the resource to, you know, um, to sell or to export. It has a flip side to it, which we are going to discuss a little later. Speak about the Dutch effect theory or Dutch effect. But largely, when you look at it, those countries which are labor intensive or resource intensive for that matter, they somehow manage to or tackle the situations of economic clash in a relatively better way. I'm not saying to the best possible extent, but in a relatively better state than those countries which are already in a situation of non-resource availability. So I would like to call them as RICs or resource intensive countries. So RICs could be defined as those countries which natural resources that account for more than 25% of total export. So whatever you are exporting as a country or as a community, if your primary exports um, are from natural resources or more than 25% of whatever total exports you are doing um, is coming from the natural resources that this particular place has, then you are likely to be dealing with economic barriers in a better way than other people for that matter. Paul Collier is an economic theorist who and a development strategist who offered this sort of an idea which he called as four development traps. Now, what has he identified as four development traps? Let's see. First one is conflict. Now, conflict is something that is internal as well as external in nature. If we take the example of India, all the internal conflicts that happen within ourselves could be, you know, um, related to economic classes or the caste class divide or the sectarian fights that keep on happening in terms of religion. Uh, so when we look at conflict, it could be both internal as well as external. External would be, let's say in our case, our fight with Pakistan or our current geopolitical tension with China, border issues, border conflicts, infiltration issues, cross-border terrorism, all kind of conflicts, all kind of conflicts have it has a larger impact on the economy, so to say. I'll give you a very small example. Just when the lockdown happened, I mean, a month or two into the lockdown, when things became very clear that we are going to have online classes and all, um, there are several issues that came up, and one among them was accessibility to better tools or accessibility to better systems so that the communication channel doesn't stop. So when we were asked to take online classes, I was struggling in that sense that I had not bought a laptop in the last 6 7 years. I had an old laptop that I was managing, and somehow because things were physical, I would work from college, and my system was okay enough to um, manage the basics here at home. Um, but recording videos on regular basis and uploading them on Moodle or taking classes, those sort of things required a slightly updated system. And I could not find a system in the market. I struggled for almost 15 to 20 days running here and there. Neither the systems were available online. I mean, the kind of configuration that I was looking for, or in the retail stores. Now it had, and that was also the time when the fight with China was almost at its peak. Now we know that India imports quite a lot of its electronic goods as well from China. So when those things were stopped, affect the thing, or it would have impact the economy. So I mean, at an individual level, I would face this kind of trouble, and others, I'm sure, would have had their own set of um, impact or effect. So when we talk about overall development of a country, um, from the economic point of view, conflict comes first, like whether you are a conflict-ridden zone or not. Then reliance on natural resources is a development trap, in the sense that then you will be constantly trying to draw from that natural resources which gives you. It's like someday that natural resources are going to get exhausted and they're non-renewable in nature. So what will you do after that? So if you are constantly, as a country, if you are constantly relying on the natural resources, better of your economy, it's not, it could be one egg in the basket, but it can't be the basket itself. So it's something that creates that sort of an economic trap or development trap. Then being landlocked with bad neighbors, like I said, if you are affected, I mean, how much of money goes into the defense budget? I'm sure you can Google and find out, or file an RTI if you want to know more details. But under Official Secret Act, you might not have access to a lot of information. But just the general idea is, if you are landlocked with bad neighbors, when you say bad neighbors, it's something that creates conflict, right? Okay, our relationship with Pakistan or our relationship with China, uh, in the past we have fought wars. So in such sort of a situation, you are likely to have the tensions continue. You are likely to invest more into your defense budget. You are likely to spend more safeguarding the nation than anything else. And then the business or the economic relationship also kind of gets affected or impacted in that sense. And the fourth and the last point in this slide would be bad governance. Okay, now I don't need to spell out everything about bad governance. I'm sure all of us have our own subjective takes regarding how good or bad governance can impact, or how it impacts the overall development of a particular country. Sometimes the agenda is being posed, sometimes that, okay, no, we are trying to, but for how long you will keep trying um, to offer a governance which is effective in nature. So unless that part is addressed, unless we have better leaders who have a vision for the country, and the vision is not, party centric or ideology centric in that sense, then it would be deeply problematic. Then you would end up being in a situation where you're caught up in a loop of economic barriers. Okay. Next point would be infrastructure gaps. Infrastructure gaps limit economic growth and human development. Infrastructure gaps, how does it affect? The increased supply cost for businesses. This causes higher prices. It hits real income. Okay, so it can be looked at as a cyclic order. The supply cost for businesses. If the supply cost for businesses are increased, then the product that is being bought will be bought at a higher price and will be sold at a higher price. If a product is particularly sold at a higher price, the affordability factors goes down, so there will be limited buyers, which in turn can affect the kind of income that a particular company or particular organization or the country was expecting. So what happens is you have invested a lot of money, because it's a cost intensive business. And since you have done that, you are, whatever product you are trying to sell, you are trying to keep it high, and you are likely to have lesser buyers in that sense. So it affects the cycle of income, whatever is the real income, it gets hit. Then reduces geographical mobility of labor, higher structural unemployment. If a particular country lacks infrastructure, what happens is um, the labor that is there in this country are not going to find more work, and they are likely to move to other places. So what happens is those people who stay back, they in turn end up being unemployed because there is already lack of infrastructure. There is already less infrastructure. Because there is less infrastructure, there is less work. Because there is less work, there is unemployment. So it's this chicken and egg kind of a situation where all of us are caught up. Then damage export competitiveness and limit intra-regional trade. Because of infrastructural gaps, um, other countries are going to those who are better placed as far as their infrastructure is concerned, are likely to export more. So that export competitiveness, whatever is there. Let's say, for example, India and Sri Lanka, both are producing teas and they are trying to sell teas to Africa or Japan or China or whatever. Um, if India is going to lack the infrastructure that is required in order to do tea production at a mass scale and export, and Sri Lanka is in a better position to do so, then the export competitiveness does get affected, which affects the economy. And it also limits intra-regional trade. Intra-regional trade would be within the states, between the northeastern places and Western India. So intra-regional trade also gets affected. So in any way, the mobility gets stopped. Now this is what happened, right? Like the most easiest example of the second part to look at is the exodus that happened, right, when the COVID crisis. I'm sure all of you would have come across these news stories and the photographs and things on the web, stories on the web saying that so many migrant laborers are, you know, walking down or they're taking buses and they're going back to their villages because there is no work. Work has stopped immediately. Work has stopped because our healthcare infrastructure was not in a situation or not in a position to tackle such sort of a situation that when the pandemic struck, whether we are going to manage to. Now, let's say post-COVID, the situation becomes better. Those workers get free vaccine once they are in a better position to take care of their health, then the situation will improve. Because they migrated because work stopped. What will they do? What will they eat? In the village, at least, there's a possibility that they might be able to feed their children or their families somehow, instead of staying in a city which demands, or a town which demands more money for survival. Then infrastructural gaps also make a country less attractive to inward foreign direct investment. That's a very easier point to understand, that FDIs only come to places where either you have cheap labor or you have better infrastructure. So India is investing in US. It's doing so because US has got better infrastructure, and if US is investing in India, they're doing so because the labor force is cheap. So it's a straighter point to understand. Then infrastructure gap also make an economy vulnerable to effects of climate change, natural disasters, something that happens, like I told you, that the pandemic struck and we are not in a situation to deal with because our healthcare infrastructure is not positioned in the right way, where a certain kind of investment could have helped better. I'm not kind of just criticizing the government's policies or how they're doing their investment budget breakdown. Just saying it can affect any country for that matter. Uh, so any impact of climate change that happens, or natural disaster that happens, kind of puts you back in that same situation of economic vulnerability. A very clear example is my state, Odisha, which is which gets affected every year because of one natural disaster or the other. There is mostly there are 2 or 3 cyclones that keeps happening, or cyclonic depressions that happen, and almost every other year the state gets affected, and clearly that has a larger impact on the economy. Then infrastructure gaps also contribute to gender inequality. How does that happen? Because it reduces the labor force which can, or the workforce which can become effective and impactful as far as women and other than gender concerned. So gender equality stays when we look at infrastructure, because the primacy is given to men over women in terms of access to um, learning or access to physical development for that matter. Then human capital inadequacies, what I said that details. So human capital refers to skills, experiences, attitudes, aptitudes of human input into production. So how all these things that you have learned over a period of time, the things that you have developed over a period of time, how we are going to put it into the production of a company, or the country for that matter. Um, if human capital inadequacies, if a country's population lack skills, they lack experience, if they lack attitude, aptitudes, then likely the production is going to be affected. And the production is going to get affected, the economy is going to get affected. So better skilled people are going to yield better economy, or are going to contribute to a growing economy, as against a labor force which uh, lacks skills or experiences for that matter. Situation. In many countries, secondary plus tertiary school enrollment is low and teaching quality is poor. Something that you will notice all the time when we look at uh, the teaching learning infrastructure in the US and UK, or any other developed countries for that matter, Australia, New Zealand. They're better because more people want to study and they're in a position where they can study, and the quality of teaching is better, as against underdeveloped countries or developing countries for that matter, where the most foundational learning is not right. So they go on to lack that confidence, they go on to lack that experience or the skills that are required for a competitive market. So it directly continue to affect the country's economy, because you are not producing skillful, thoughtful individuals and communities. In many countries, there is a big gap between expected years of schooling and actual years of schooling, okay? Because people do not have, especially underdeveloped countries and developing countries, um, there's always a fight for survival. There's always a fight to um, continue to survive at the first place than to go to school and learn. So the gap that stays, that continues. And a lot of people, that's why the whole idea back in the day was to introduce adult literacy or adult education, that those people who missed out on schooling, they at least in their haze, they would at least learn something or the other, and contribute to the economy by picking up some sort of uh, job or the other. So that in turns uh, contributes to the economy. And huge inequality within and between developing countries in the quality of schooling and access. You can clearly see the differences between the cities and the city schools and the village schools, or schools in conflict within zones like Naxal affected zones, or the most interior parts of the country, where you have tribal population, or those population which are away from the mainstream. You can see what sort of schooling system or schooling infrastructure has been developed or not there. So that inequality stays, right? It's like it has a snowball effect. Unless they kind of they are allowed, or they are allowed to step up the ladder, they will never be able to come par with you. So they lack that basic confidence most of the times. Then lower and middle income countries may suffer from brain drains of their younger, more skilled laborers. Something that happens, people migrate to other places because there is better work opportunities and the scope to earn more and live a better, happy life kind of entices them. So lower and middle income countries also doesn't pay, to the skillful laborers or skillful workers, or the younger population for that matter. So that's why everybody wants to migrate to Canada or US, because the conditions of living is better, the standard of living is better. So we tend to gravitate towards that. So that impacts the economy as well, because our skilled laborers don't want to stay here because the country is clearly not in a state to pay whatever they would be able to earn in a country which is more developed. Then weak human capital constraints labor productivity and ability to harness new technology. Again, consider developed countries, underdeveloping countries, and developed countries as against the other ones, the weaker ones, and how that affects the labor productivity. Because if there is less ability to have technological access, you're not learning new things, then your application process stops. Your application process stops, that the product or that technological access also gets limited. So the productivity thus gets affected. Then human capital deficiencies often linked to malnutrition. Very clear sort of an understanding is something that we have studied in our social sciences book and as well as science books while growing up, that when we talk about human capital, we are talking about all those things that we spoke in point number one, that if you're a happy person, if you're a confident person, if you're somebody who carries a certain amount of expertise and experience and skills, your attitude and your aptitude towards looking at different situations of life, whether it is good or bad, would be different. If you are somebody who's impoverished, if you are somebody who has lived an unhealthy life and has suffered from different kind of maladies over a period of time, you are less likely to be confident. You are less likely to be in a situation where your dealing or transactions in an everyday world gets affected. So whatever human capital can go into the labor force or can contribute to the overall economy of a country does get affected and doesn't cut through. And so malnutrition at the most you know growing up stage impacts the population in the first place. Then better basic health care and nutrition also unlocks improved human capital by avoiding brain impairment. Your cognitive values or abilities to think and act also gets affected or impacted if you're not given better health care or nutrition. That's why certain foods are considered to be absolute for kids. Why do we say so? Because till 25 years of age, a human brain is supposed to develop. You are supposed to grow. If your childhood or your growing up years, your formative years are affected because of these kind of barriers, then it would have a subsequent impact on your body. Primary product dependence. Many developing countries continue to have high dependence on extracting and exporting primary commodities. Okay, so whatever you are extracting and whatever you are exporting as your primary commodities, you are constantly dependent on that. These economies are vulnerable to volatile global prices. Things go up, then many times selling doesn't happen. This is what I was saying when I said that Dutch disease effect. What is Dutch disease effect? It's kind of a paradox. You have a lot of resources, but you can't do much with that resources because nobody is in a situation to buy those products. So in spite of having plenty of natural resources, it's like a curse because the factor is import driven. You constantly suffer from that because the global market prices are going to fluctuate, and you in turn will not be able to export as much as you can, and that affects the economy. The extractive rents often fuel corruption, inequality, and wasteful consumption as natural resources also get depleted. Okay, so corruption, inequality, and wasteful consumption. We are not aware, we are mindlessly consuming. Sometimes we waste because we think that we have so much of it, without considering that these are deployable at one point in time. Then high commodity prices can cause currency appreciation and may lead to the Dutch disease deindustrialization. Even if you are in a position of offering something as a primary product for export, if you are keeping the price high, nobody is going to appreciate that value, and that might lead to business being affected and economy being affected. Then often resource revenues are not used productively to diversify economy and improve human development index outcomes through investment in education and healthcare. One thing that I had been time and again saying from the beginning, that after your basic amenities are taken care of, the next two things that is crucial for any government, for that matter, whether it is state or center or within as individuals, how we can contribute or sustain, is we must invest. Instead of looking at it from a very selfish point of view, we must contribute to our community at least, and see how that can have a snowball effect, or how you know 5 individuals can come together and inspire a community, and a community can inspire 5 more communities when we are somewhere contributing to education and healthcare sector. So unless that happens, unless those resources that we have, natural resources that we have as primary product, that revenues is not used productively, and it's not used to diversify the economy. What does diversification of economy means? Diversification of economy would be around the idea that you need to not put everything, every every money that you have, every capital that you have, you need not put it in one basket. As I said, you can't say that, okay, this is the product that we have and we continue to invest in that. Then what would happen is you would be a rich country, but you would be an ignorant country as well, because your population would not get educated, your population wouldn't have that kind of healthcare. The reason why countries like Sweden or Finland, for that matter, they are rated so high in the Human Development Index is because they are tiny countries. Agreed. They have smaller population to deal with. Agreed. But they have really invested into that kind of sector. We are here to deal with our the most fundamental challenge is that of food. That where are we placed as far as our hunger index is concerned? Where are we placed as far as the happiness index is concerned? So human development needs to be considered from a point of view of happiness and hunger, and how the direct correlation is. When people are hungry, they are not going to look at education. They're not going to look at healthcare. Their primary motto would be to survive. So pressure to be many countries rich in natural resources often have slow rates of growth and poor development scores, because they are not invested rightly, or they don't diversify their economy. Then corruption as a barrier to growth and development. According to the UN, corruption undermines human development and democracy. It reduces access to public services by diverting public resources for private. It's something that we have been time and again facing. There's so many civil society activists and dissenting voices who are constantly saying how governance after governance have invested or diverted public resources or funds into the private players, and they in turn make their coffers fill. So the direct nexus between the establishment or the dispensation and the powerful private players who do businesses, how policies are framed, understand how policies are framed so that it will be suitable for the for a capitalistic market, and that is corruption of one kind, and that how that works as a barrier to growth and development. High levels of corruption damage growth and development. In this way, it inhibits direct foreign investment into an economy. There's a possibility of that, because they don't want to invest money into a corrupt economy. Then leads to allocative inefficiency, that is diverting public resources for private gain. Like I told you, extreme examples of extravagant wealth. You can see that in the case of, there's a very fine documentary series that you would come across called Bad Boy Billionaires. It's playing in Netflix. You can see three cases, whether it is Sahara, whether it is the Vijay Mallya story, or whether it is the Nirav Modi story. You'll see how how the public sector and the government policies were tweaked so that, or the loopholes there were used in order to have extravagant wealth. Then contributes to persistent income and wealth inequality, and this contributes, like, so corruption has a larger impact and breaks really down to to impact the social capital of the country. So you tend to be in that sort of a situation as individuals and as well as communities who continue to be in that situation. There's a breach of trust that happens. We tend to lose and we tend to stay lackadaisical for that matter. Okay, this is a corrupt country, you pay and you get your things done. That's how it works. So what happens is it never stops. You're constantly in that loop. As individuals, as well as communities, you tend to be in that situation. And it leads to substantial poorer human development outcomes because governments are not collecting enough tax revenues. Most of the times this is there because what happens is, I mean, we tend to think that we are paying so much of taxes, in this country. If you look at places like Canada and US, the amount of taxes the public pays is way more than whatever we are paying. So what happens is we are going to continue to stay poor unless we tend to invest back into the state. That is crucial. And when doing so, what happens is most of the times we tend to pay to corrupt officers to get our work done. We never get challans, rightfully, because we think that, okay, we saved $50. So that $50 gets into 500, 500 becomes 5,000, 5 lakhs, 5 crores. That's how it works. Okay, so that corruption loop has to be broken. Okay, so that's more or less what I wanted to share or discuss about, economic barriers to development communication. And I'll stop here. Thank you.